chasing water. Eyes grow tired, but my legs still wander. On and on, on and on, on and on. It's so better, so better, so better, I'm all alone.
Welcome to Conversations in Color, a weekly series committed to open, honest conversation and exploring hard questions regarding race and racism in Western Wisconsin and beyond. Here is your host, Ed Hudgens.
Well, hello there. Hello there, and welcome to Conversations in Color. We're coming to you live tonight from the Jamf Theater in the lovely Pablo Center in the lovely downtown Eau Claire. And so glad that you are joining us. Again, my name is Ed Hudgens. I work with Converge Radio and Uniting Bridges. And those who know me know I've got my hands in a bunch of stuff and probably need to cut back a little bit, but that's beside the point. This thing we're doing with Conversations in Color, we're excited about it. We want to lean in on some hard questions and topics and be honest about them. And that kind of speaks to these, as we're having this conversation tonight, and as we do every Monday night, we're going to focus on three main pillars. The first one is honesty. So we're not going to be afraid to ask hard questions, and we're not going to be afraid to lean in on hard things, controversial things, difficult things, emotional things. We are also going to practice humility, and specifically what I mean by that is that none of us on this panel and none of us listening in on this or whatever, none of us have this figured out. None of us have any of this totally figured out. And we need to come into these conversations with humility, knowing that we are fundamentally flawed and limited as human beings. And then lastly, we are committed to honoring humanity because we believe in the value and dignity of every person. And so we are committed to making sure that there's nobody getting vilified or degraded as a part of this show, that we want to uphold humanity. So honesty, humility, and humanity are our main three pillars of this show in terms of the ethos of this show and the conversations that we want to have here. Now, I'm very pleased tonight to have some great panelists I want to introduce you to. First off, we have the person who is playing the role of our resident panelist tonight. This is Dr. Rod Jones. He is sitting in Celica's seat, which that's a big place to have to sit. But Dr. Jones, who I call Rod because he allows me to, is a assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire, working in special education and inclusive practices. Been here just about a year and a half, not quite, and has years of experience in the education world, and is a proud alum of the University of South Florida. Welcome, Rod, once again.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Right. And we've got Willie McCaleb, who is a friend of mine who I've known for a little over a year now. He is a special ed assistant at North Star Middle School, was raised in Florida. He's not shy to talk about his Florida roots. Yeah. Played football at the University of St. Francis in Illinois, where he also graduated with his BA in business and marketing. And he works with the Eau Claire Sports Academy and doing some athletic training and things like that. He also still plays football when he can. Yeah. And last but not least, he has his own brand known as Shag, and I'm going to give him just a moment to tell us what that is.
So Shag Academy is a sports performance type place. I train athletes there, all types of sports. It's a place not only where I provide like sports training, but I use that as an opportunity to mentor, lead, and guide the youth and try to push them into a positive way.
Awesome. And you have sweet T-shirts.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've seen those. All right. Last but not least, we have Thurgood Dennis, who is a somewhat recent grad of the UW Eau Claire, and he was an outstanding athlete there at the university, did track and field, played cornerback for the football team, and his pursuit right now, aside from the job that he has to pay his bills, is he is reading everything he can find, from what I understand. Is that right, Thurgood?
Absolutely. Got to get I kind of have to get my learning underway. My education is set, now I got to learn. So
yes.
Getting after it.
I can appreciate that difference. All right. And then we need to introduce the esteemed Adam Akala, who works with CoLab here in Eau Claire, and he is definitely an important part of this whole Conversations in Color team and process. Adam, what are you up to tonight?
Thanks, Ed. I'll be focusing on audience engagement throughout the course of the evening. So if you have questions to ask our panelists, you can feel free to drop those on the Paragon live stream chat. Otherwise, if you want to private message them to me, you can right-click my name and send them to me in a private message. You can also call 715-600-0267 if you're listening to us on Converge Radio 99.9 FM. Again, that number is 715-600-0267, and we can intersperse those questions into the chat tonight as we get going. So, again, I'll keep watching that chat and listening for some phone calls to see if we can add some questions into our conversation tonight.
All right, that sounds good. You got anything else for us, Adam?
I do. So I've got the most important question that we're going to ask for this evening. We like to keep things a little bit light to kick us off. So our icebreaker question for the night is, if you had an extra hour of free time each day, what would you do with it? Ed, I'll start with you.
So, okay, Adam, I'm going to challenge the premise that this is a light question. This is a deep philosophical question for me. Those who know me well know that I wish that we didn't have to sleep at night and that we had several more hours in the day, because I feel like there's always stuff to do. Stuff I want to do. It's not even just like, stuff to do. So this is a hard question for me, because I think I should be saying I'd like to just rest for an hour. But really, I would be working on stuff. I'd get more stuff done. But that's partly because I find a lot of joy in the stuff I'm doing, so it's very fulfilling. But that's me. I would probably try to get some more work done, maybe something to do with Conversations in Color or Converge Radio. Now, Willie, what do you think?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I mean, ideally, you would want to rest, you know what I mean? But in a realistic world, I think I'll be working, doing something geared towards my brand, something that's still working with the kids, or something inspiring the youth still. So I doubt I'll rest. I'll probably be doing something, with my brand or something that involves kids easily.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Thurgood, how about you?
I'm going to steal a term from Aristotle, peripatetic. He would go out.
Philosophical, I told you.
He would go out on his porch at night and have beer and refreshments and food and have anyone over who wanted to talk that wanted to. And I think I would have an hour of conversation every day with people I disagree with, especially I was actually adopted, so my parents are white, and my skin puts me in a group that is different than my upbringing, a little like Pudd'nhead Wilson type of stuff going on. Yeah. So I would have conversations with people from both sides who I've gotten to know that don't ever talk to each other, and I think that'd be my extra hour per night.
That sounds awesome.
That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Rod, how about you?
Yeah, it would be work too. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I have a lot of grading that I've fallen behind on, and I would be committing my hour of free time to catching up on grading.
Yeah. So that's one thing that you and Salika have in common, is you both got grading to catch up on.
Yeah, I mean, you're always behind the gun, the metaphorical gun at least.
Adam, how about you? What do you think?
I think right now I've been reading a lot. Right now I'm reading The Song Poet by Kaukalia Yang, and it's just an incredible book from an incredible perspective about the Hmong people, and specifically Hmong people who moved to the Minneapolis area. So getting kind of worldly perspectives through books is something that has been awesome for me in the last couple of months especially, but I wish that I had more time to dedicate to it during a day.
Man, I like all these answers, except for Rod's. I don't want to do Rod's, but the rest of them sound really good.
Someone's got it.
Yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Well, you're right. It's be realistic. You got the things in front of you got to do. Yes. And the truth of the matter is, some days that extra hour I'd have to commit to my day job at some point. So, well, we're talking about tonight black masculinity and emotional well-being. And I'd like to kick off talking about that by sharing with you something, an excerpt from a statement from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And if Adam would be so kind, he can slip the link to this article in the chat so you can check it out on if you want to. But this came out on May 29th, so just right fresh in the wake of what happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis. This is from the CEO of that organization, Daniel H. Gillison Jr., and again, this is just an excerpt. The effect of racism and racial trauma on mental health is real and cannot be ignored. The disparity in access to mental health care in communities of color cannot be ignored. The inequality and lack of cultural competency in mental health treatment cannot be ignored. Our nation's African American community is going through an extremely painful experience, pain that has been inflicted upon this community repeatedly throughout history and is magnified by mass media and repeated deaths. We stand with all the families, friends, and communities who have lost loved ones senselessly due to racism. And with more than 100,000 lives lost to the coronavirus pandemic, disproportionately from minority communities, these recent deaths add gasoline to the fire of injustice. While there is much we need to do to address racism in our country, we must not forget the importance of mental health as we do so. Racism is a public health crisis. Now, that's something a little later in our conversation I want to explore, the idea of it being a health issue, a public health issue. But before we get into that, I would love to hear from you, the three of you. As you watched the video of George Floyd being killed by Officer Chauvin, former Officer Chauvin, over in Minneapolis at the end of May, what was your response to that? Like, and I mean, if you're willing to share beyond just this is bad and evil on an intellectual level, but emotionally, how did it impact you?
Yeah, Ed, I would honestly say that I didn't watch the video.
Okay.
And I refused to watch the video because of the fact that it's so emotional. You know, quite frankly, I'm tired of seeing black men killed in this country senselessly. It's just another reiteration of what I've come to know and understand about this nation as it relates to the treatment of African American males. So, again, I don't. You hear it, right? Within media, you hear your colleagues talking about it. You hear your friends, family members talking about it. But for me, I just did not want to deal with the emotional pain of it by watching the video, because actually I was hurt just by hearing that it happened.
Knowing that
and it was enough for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. In fact, I would say I haven't watched the whole video. I mean, I've watched enough to know and to see what happened. But I can't relate with it on the same level that you're talking about. But that emotional pain, I get why you may not want to engage. You know, I have a black son, and so some of the videos I've seen of young black men being killed by the police, or not even the police, just other situations.
Absolutely.
It's easy for me to see my son in those circumstances. So, Thurgood, Willie, what do you guys think?
Well, for me, I watched it because, like, only one or two times in one day, and then haven't gone back for similar reasons. But I watched it from the perspective of community and police and how sort of traumatizing, like, discombobulated that relationship is right now. The reason for that is, even before that incident, I work at the resort with a gentleman named Logan, who's 20, and he's trying to become a police officer. And he was in a police school that worked with CVTC as well as UW Eau Claire, and now he's driving a squad car on the night shift, so the easy ones, but he's learning to do it on the job for UW Eau Claire. He's an Eau Claire policeman. And he updated me throughout his sort of like police academy. I don't know if that would be the right term for it, but his training. And he said that there were African American kids in his class who quit after that video because when it's Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, and they didn't want to have to deal with the pressures of that. And he said he could understand them completely. And he was telling me I should watch the video because from what he learned, the cops did not do their sort of escalation properly, as from what he learned just as a fresh cop, as a really, really young face. And so I watched it from that perspective. But from the emotional perspective, it's really hard because it's, you know, I remember back to Trayvon worrying that would be my brother, and this is just another one again. So it's hard to kind of keep track emotionally sometimes.
No, I hear you.
Absolutely, man, and I agree. I mean, it's traumatizing. You know, you see it over and over. You know, and you feel like their job is to protect you first. You know, and serve. And when you continue seeing certain things happen, and there's no protection, there's nothing, there's no justice. You know, it's hard to keep seeing that. You know, so when I first saw it, woke up one morning, saw it in Messenger or Facebook, and like I immediately like broke down. You know what I mean? Like I isolated myself, went, sat down, you know, closed the door, and you know, I shedded some tears because seeing I mean, he looked no different from me. You know what I mean? There's nothing. It's just he was at a different place, different time, but you know, that's a brother. You know what I mean? He looked just like me. So when you see something like that happen, you see that happening to yourself. You know what I mean? And you know, you're so cautious of everything. You know, like, and I've been like that since I was a kid, man. You see the cops get behind, you see the lights, like it's a feeling that you can't really explain. And then when you see that, I mean, it's been times the cops done been behind me. You know, like. So I just think like, man, that could have happened to me this year ago, that year ago. It's just so when I first seen it, like, yeah, traumatizing, man. I couldn't look no more. Yeah. You know, I seen that one time and I was just like, you know, one and done, because me personally, like seeing that stuff over and over, like, or seeing that over and over, like I can't deal with it. You know what I mean? Like I get mad, angry, you know what I mean, and can't control my emotions sometimes. So like. The best way to handle it for me is not to keep looking at it, you know. So I look at it one time and move on from it.
It's kind of like having an emotional boundary. Like you got to make sure you're protecting yourself a little bit emotionally.
That's exactly what it is, and you know, it's. I would say that's probably the best way to describe it. To be honest with you, you're setting up this barrier, so to speak, right? And I wouldn't call it a superficial barrier. It's real, right? You do engage in this veiling of a process, right? So I was listening to Willie, you know, and I'm sure we'll probably come back around to this, but it is an interesting phenomenon when you think about what Willie just mentioned, because every black man in this country will probably utter the same thing that he just mentioned. When you see the lights come on as a black man behind you, right? It becomes almost instinctual, really. You kind of go into this sense of a survival mode, fight or flight. You know, and that's why when I look at those videos, I understand perfectly why many brothers will fight their way out of the situation or run away from the situation oftentimes, if they're ill-equipped emotionally to deal with, right, the hardness, the reality of the situation in the moment.
But even right. You know, we've all seen examples of where a young black man was abused or killed by the police when they're cooperating.
Sure, absolutely.
So, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, I've seen enough of that footage. I've seen enough of those pictures. You know, if I was in that situation, if it was me in that role, I'd be tempted to run too, because I have no guarantee that I'm going to be safe. Yeah. You know. Yeah. I'm glad that you guys brought up the whole the lights in the mirror thing, because I've mentioned this before, but a couple of years ago I was pulled over for running through a red light. I'm still not sure that the police officer was right about the situation. And so anyway, it was over near Phoenix Park, and I pulled into the road that runs right in front of Phoenix Park to, so he could come talk to me, and I was indignant. I was like, I didn't do anything wrong. What the heck is this? You know? And in the middle of that, and everything was fine, and I had to pay the ticket. It didn't make any sense to contest it because I was probably wrong. But that's not the point. The point is, at no point did I ever feel in danger. At no point did I ever feel at risk. And like, my emotional response to being pulled over by the police officer is, dang, I'm gonna have to pay a fine, or you know, like, that's about as bad as it gets for me. And I thought about my brothers who don't have that kind of experience and don't have that kind of security if a police officer pulls up behind them. And I want to talk about that a little bit. I want to talk about why that's there, why that is that instinct that you just talked about, Rod, and same thing, Willie. What is can you talk a little bit about what's behind that feeling? So first of all, when the lights come on and you see him in the back, what are you feeling and what are you thinking? And then, like, I want to, as much as we can, dive into the emotional reaction to that. So can you guys talk about that a little bit?
I think my answer would probably be different than both of yours. Like I mentioned I was adopted. Both my parents are white, Julie and Robert, in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And from the time I was very, very little, up until my brother was born when I was 4, 5, 6, 7, they would teach me that when you go into a store, you have to have your hood down, like keep your hands where people can see them, and make sure you're polite to everyone, make eye contact with everyone, speak when you're spoken to. And I sort of assumed until I got to high school that every kid, white or black, just got taught those things. And then when I started getting a little more independence, going to stores and stuff with friends, white friends, which I had a lot of because I went to Notre Dame Academy, which was a basically 98% white school. The majority of the minorities were from Japan or China as exchange students, and there would be 5, 6 black people in a school of 800. So with those friends going out for off-campus lunch and stuff or hanging out after school, they noticed that I was doing those things in like buildings or when a cop would go by and stuff like that. So I was always taught to keep my hands on the wheel and don't reach for even the ignition, just make contact first and let that officer know that you're not like a threat. And I never understood that race had something to do with that. So when I found out that it did, I sort of became black. And that was probably from the ages of 20 to 24 when there were enough interactions that series of lessons could sink in. And I realized that it's an issue. I kind of, before that, didn't know what to call that lesson that they had taught me. So I always was sort of like preparing for the worst, but didn't know why even.
Right. Man. So first of all, I'm glad that your parents did that.
They weren't. They were mad. They were like, why should we have to do this? And then friends who were black of them back in the city were saying, you're going to want to know this. Yeah. They thought that, it's kind of funny, their black friends, when they found out that my name was going to be Thurgood, they thought it was going to be a biological kid. And they're like, you cannot name a white kid Thurgood. So it was those friends that would tell them that this was necessary. So they kind of had the best of education as parents to help me.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So you had that kind of that switch flip on for you in your early 20s. Where it's
I'm not reaching for anything.
I'm black.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a really weird feeling. Because kind of for religious reasons, which you can't go all the way into, and kind of for reasons of like football and sports, you just think like it's a Remember the Titans thing where you'll be judged by what you bring to the team. Or like there's a song by Jay-Z that is, I forget what it's called, but he said, The Story of OJ. And at the beginning he says, I'm not black, I'm OJ. That's what I thought about myself. I was like, I'm just Thurgood. Right. Then when you realize that that's your subjective, and in the objective, you're just sort of your body. Your mind and spirit aren't considered with how people see you right away. You have to work hard to get that communication. Yeah. So then I realized I'm black, and from then it's been a lot of learning very, very fast.
Well, and this is something we're going to talk about in a future episode. We're going to talk about biracial children, adopted children, where families become biracial because of the adoption, that kind of thing. And I think it would be great to dive into that with you more later, because there are so many layers to the identity piece there. And I see it with my son at 11, being raised by 2 super white people in a super white part of the world. And his skin is black, but his soul is white Wisco in a lot of ways. I mean, and so figuring out how should he see himself, and how do we help him see himself in the healthiest way possible, So Willie and Rod, what do you, talk that same question about, you see the lights coming up.
Yeah, I would say, probably, Thurgood, and I don't want to speak for you, Willie, but perhaps a determinant for me was the truth factor. Within the black community, there's not a lot of trust propagated for the police. And I don't know if you experienced that yourself, Willie, but we're kind of taught, they're there to help and protect us, but at the same time, we do know that there's a malevolent side to them. And we're taught that, for the most part in the black community. At least that was my experience. So that sense of fear, right, learned at a very, very early age, right, transcends over into adulthood, right? Your parents do teach you to some extent to respect their authority, but at the same time, there's another side of that narrative, right, to where, you know, be careful because they will exercise, right, these certain heinous acts against you if you don't X, Y, Z, right? And so you get both sides of the coin, right? And that fear sticks with you into your adulthood. And it's just ingrained.
Yeah, it becomes like instinct, right?
Absolutely. And that's why I say, you know, it becomes instinctual. And it bears itself out. You see it over and over. So it's not like it's a fictive narrative, right?
Right.
It would be one thing if your parents said this to you and then you never saw the reality of it or the truth of it. You see it play itself out over and over and over and over. So you come to believe that side of the coin is more prevalent and truthful than the other side.
Right. Well, because I think a lot of that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the function of police is supposed to be protect and serve.
Absolutely.
But this is what we see.
This is what we see.
Willie, how about you?
Absolutely, man. I would have to agree 100%. I just know, like, growing up, man, it was my mom would always tell me, son, you got a couple strikes against you from the time you walk out this house, you know, as a black man, you know, and just when I was young, I didn't understand that. Like, you know, she telling you got strikes against you. What you mean, mama? But you gotta understand, being a black man, like, you got stuff against you coming right out the door, like, you know, cops, you know, whatever. And the next white man, you know what I mean, that's trying to cut you short from whatever you're doing. But like, that's when you grow up in the black community, like you like you say, you taught to like shy away from the police, like, you know, move away from them type thing. You know what I mean? And you know, you see cops in the neighborhood, like, you don't sit around, you move around. You know what I mean? Like, you ain't trying to get them no reasons, you know. But yeah, like, you know, growing up in the black community and having my middle school right across the street from the projects, you know what I'm saying? All you ever seen was, you know, the police would come in and take a brother out. You know what I mean? Like, not like kill him or nothing like that, but like, he's going to jail, they kicking drug buses and stuff like that. You always see the police doing to your community and not, you know, really helping your community. So that's something that you repeat and see, you know what I mean? And I take it all the way back, you know, to the early like days when I was born, like the 80s. You know, you think about the crack epidemic, you know what I mean? And you got these polices that's out there that's giving out, you know, drugs and coming in and arresting those same brothers for the same thing that they bringing into the community. So we ain't never been taught to like them because they always, you know what I mean, always came and took from us.
Yep.
You know, so it's hard. It's hard to it's hard to accept that, you know, and keep watching it happen and happen and happen. Like, it's tough on you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds like that. I mean, again, I'm listening to you three, and it sounds like having those kinds of boundaries is just wisdom, like understanding. It's unfortunate that that's wisdom, but it is what it is. And, you know, we're talking about like the extreme cases of police harassment and that kind of thing. There's also things like microaggressions when, you know, like certain looks on people's faces when you start talking to somebody or whatever, you know, or when you're walking down the street and you make eye contact with somebody and their facial expression changes. And I think I can't speak to this at all, but I'd love to hear you three talk about it. But do you notice those kinds of things? I mean, are you sensitive to that kind of thing? Like, so, you know, we know the big stories that make the news, but talking about the day-to-day stuff that you experience, you guys see that, feel that, experience that stuff?
I think I do, and there's a specific kind of microaggression that makes me feel really bad, which is, and since we're talking about masculinity, it can go for just men in general, but black men in particular, I would say, if you're walking even on Water Street or anywhere in Eau Claire, any city, and a girl will be like scared of you. She'll like clutch her purse or something, or switch sides on the sidewalk. And I would never want to like mess with someone walking home. Like, I'll walk you home. That's like how I look at it. But there's no external thing. I can't act like walking down the street, not trying to hurt anyone. Like, there's nothing I can project that like says that. So then I'm like, her fear
Wear a
is just
T-shirt or something that has a
like
catchphrase on.
This guy's nice, or you know what I mean? There's no real way to like project that out. So
Yes.
I just try to like act like I'm just walking, you know, maybe for food or maybe for something else. But that's one that I like struggle with, because I wouldn't want to mess up anyone's day. But it's not even me doing it. It's like her image of me.
Right.
So I can't, and I don't get to control that. I get to control what's between my ears, not anyone else's.
But you do get to feel the pain of that reality. You know what I mean? I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
Oh, no, not at all.
But
No, I just to piggyback off that, man, I think that goes back to the power perception and Dennis Bill, you know what I mean? Changing that narrative, you know, like there's been a perception that's been pushed, a narrative that's been pushed for years, for centuries, you know what I mean, of what black people are supposed to be like, what black people are supposed to act like, or what they do. That's been pushed out in the media, TV, movies, everything for centuries, man. So that's why you walk into situations like that when people want to move on the other side. They don't even know you, but they going off what they perceived of narratives and information over the years and never really been in, going somewhere where a bunch of black people are. And knowing that that's not what they really are. You just going off what you've seen on the TV screen, you know? So that's where you get that. And that's, like I say, a part of power perception with Dennis Bill. That's what we're trying to change.
Sure.
yeah, I want to make a comment about that. We actually wanted Dennis to be here tonight, but his schedule didn't allow it to happen. But I appreciate you bringing him up, because I think he's got some expertise and experience around all this stuff, and maybe we can tap into his wisdom a little later on. So thank you for bringing him up. Rod, what you think?
You know, it's interesting, and I mean, I think the older I get, the more I kind of accept it as being a normative thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really don't even look for it that much anymore, to be honest with you, because I accept it as manifest.
It's like you kind of got numb to it.
Yeah, I'm kind of over it. I mean, when I was probably in my 20s or whatever, I would, look at things and I would get all upset, and, but I know that when I enter into certain spaces and places that it's going to happen, but I don't look for it, because, the way that I'm going to douse that is when I open my mouth, I'm going to hit you with so much intellect, right? To where
this is accurate.
You're going to be befuddled. Yeah. Because you haven't heard or seen or witnessed, a black man speak to you this way.
Yeah.
Right? This is atypical. So I'm trying to rupture, right, your sense of acumen, right, your sense of intelligence about perceptions of black men just through my discourse. I'm going to take you to a different level.
My head's still spinning from the vocabulary you used in our first session.
Yeah, well, that's some of it, but that's the way that I feel like, for me, that I want to rupture the narrative.
Yeah.
Not everybody's like that, right? Everybody takes a different position, right? But I don't really think about it too much, because I already know that it is. It just is.
Yeah.
And so the only thing I can do is I tell my wife, and you mentioned this word a little bit earlier, Thurgood, I tell my wife all the time, I can only control my controllables.
Yeah.
That's it, And I don't know if you want to call that wisdom or whatever, but, it's just...
Sometimes it's just survival, right?
It is, because, you would spend so much of your time just being upset, right, with all the microaggressions that you experience, if you just looking for them, right, or you pay much attention to them. I mean, seriously. And I just choose not to live my life that way anymore.
Yeah.
And it's sad, but it's just the way it is.
Is it okay if it ticks me off a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that I don't get upset about it. Don't get me wrong. But I'm saying is that I don't exhaust or expend as much energy.
You've got enough stuff to spend your energy on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't exhaust or expend as much energy thinking about it or looking for it anymore, because I know that I'm very unlikely to change that.
Yeah.
Right? It is not within me. It's within you, right? And I just don't have the time to convince you
Right.
to think otherwise, right? The only thing I can do is when you talk to me, right, you can make certain assumptions predicated, all right, on your experience discursively talking to me, right? Because otherwise, you know, I'm not going to befriend you, or I'm not going to be your acquaintance or your associate unless we're working in close quarters, right? Over extended period, years, whatever time.
Yeah.
So, you know, those are just small nuggets of time that I try to, like I said, rupture their way of thinking.
So we've kind of alluded to this a little bit in stuff we've talked about here in the last couple minutes. I want to touch on this piece, and then we'll shift. But the idea of cognitive load. So, Rod, I think it sounds like you're really familiar with that idea. Can you talk a little bit about that idea of cognitive load and how that's applicable in the stuff we're talking about?
Yeah, it's how can I put it? It's really, I would say that it is a very oppressive way to exist. Oppressive. When you think about this notion of cognitive load, that is all the pressures of emotionality, everything betwixt, right? Being placed upon you psychically, right? Emotionally, right? And there's only so much you can hold on to, right? Cognitively, before, right, you engage in this sense of externalizations, and I'm just putting that politely, right? Behaviors, right? And so it's interesting because there's so much that black men, right, load upon themselves, right, from the experience within the world that people have absolutely no idea what we're battling with on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
You know, on a day-to-day basis, dealing with all of the pressures, right, that we have to encounter being just black men, you know, and the exhibition of those things, right, how they manifest themselves, right, in different situations, you know, and a lot of times, you know, people question, you know, well, why didn't he, the black guy, right, behave in this way?
Yeah.
Right? Or why didn't they do X, Y, Z? Right? But they have no idea of those things that are going on cognitively, right, that we're processing day in and out, right, that drive us to respond to situations in certain ways. And just kind of hearkening back to what we said earlier about, you know, the fight or flight, you know, when black men are stopped by the cops, right? That is a very cognitive loading situation, right? And even when you are taught, right, to respond in a way that is acceptable, that is amenable to the authorities, you're still concerned about your welfare, right?
And rightfully so.
You know, and so there's a lot riding on our shoulders that people don't really take the time to stop and ask, you know, how are you doing today, right? And, you know, a little bit later we'll talk about this notion of care and what that means, but that's the essence of black masculinity within its context here in America, in the U.S.
So we talked about, you know, just the nature of the black community's relationship with police and policing in general. We talked a little bit about these microaggressions. What are some other things that contribute to that idea of cognitive load? Willie Thurgood, what do you guys think?
I think when you go back to how they portrayed it, that we as blacks, especially black men, are like predators. Like we have to be policed at all times. You know what I mean? And that we have to like be held to a different standard than everybody else. Like, you know, I tell people, you know, a black man got it harder than anything else on this planet. You know what I mean? The black man has it tougher for trying to get a job, trying to fight for his kids. You know what I mean? Any situation, it seems like the black man is up against everybody. You know what I mean? I shared a picture some time ago on Facebook, and it's like the black brother was just taking a knee, and he had the cop shooting at him. He had a KKK guy behind him. He had his own brother shooting at him, and it's just like we getting it from all angles. You know what I mean? And I don't think nobody really pays attention to that how much of a fight that we have to fight when we just step out our door to just go to work, and you know what I mean? Like, we got to fight our own brother, you know what I mean, which is something that needs to change. We got this white supremacist we got to fight against, and we got the cops we got to fight against. Not all cops are bad cops, but I'm just saying that's what our load is.
Yeah.
We got to fight that load every day.
And it's like the feeling of like feeling targeted. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. And I just don't think that when things like this occur and then they push it in the media, you know what I mean, the things that happen, like, I don't think people understand that we're not just up against just that one situation or that one narrative. Like, we up against more than that. You know? So
that's only part of the story.
Yeah, you just seeing peanuts. Like, that ain't nothing compared to what. And that's no disrespect to any family or anybody that lost someone to police brutality. I'm just saying, like, we've been fighting that fight for the longest. You know, so yeah, man. I think, like he said, I just think people should like pay a little bit more attention to what the black man is really up against on a daily basis.
Yeah, we're gonna. I hopefully we could, I think, talk for hours about all this, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about the background with all that here in a little bit, hopefully. So, Thurgood, how about you? Cognitive load.
Well, Dr. Jones, you sounded to me a little bit like Kendrick Lamar in what you were, the stuff you were putting down. But not all rap, which is a black art, not all of culture thinks about it like that. So, for cognitive load, the only thing I can think of is cognitive dissonance, where culture might be telling me that black people do this or this action, white people do this or this, someone who's holy does this or this, and you know, all these different expectations of behavior that you're trying to fit into, I'm only one person.
Sure.
And I have to go to practice, I have to get enough sleep every night, I have to do my homework. These are non-negotiables. Like, certain things are you have to do to get by in your life. And when you're doing those things and people will wonder, like, oh, I've never heard a black person talk like that. And you're like, there's nowhere that I can put that information in my head. It's just how I talk. Like, there's no, I'm not going to be able to change that. That's like sort of beneath the conscious level. And so it's like, I'll get this weird idea that someone in a place, like, I think it causes some social anxiety. I'll try to be guessing how everybody's perceiving me and what action will do what. But I only have one body to make one action.
You can't do that, bro.
Absolutely. So it gets confusing. I think that's part of the load that you might be alluding to.
Yeah, the reason I bring up the cognitive load thing, and then we need to switch because the time is flying here, is that I learned I went through a class, a parenting class a while back. It's been a few years ago now, where it talked about the emotional threshold that your child has.
Sure.
And how you know, a lot of kids might have this much threshold, you know, like ones that aren't neurodivergent, don't have, you know, a lot of things happening. But then you have some that it's like this, and all it takes is one wrong word, one thing not going their way, and all of a sudden things blow up. And I can't help but think about that logic when it comes to cognitive load with black men. You know, you talked about, Rod, the idea of you can't hold it so much in. Eventually, it's going to come out in some kind of behavior.
Absolutely.
You know, I see that with my son. That has nothing to do with him being black. That's just being a human being with a short threshold.
Absolutely.
And so that's just one of those things that I think the white community in particular, and certainly police officers, police departments, need to empathize with a little bit more and understand a little bit more about what's going on.
Yeah, and if I can add just one more piece to that, you know, it's interesting, right? Because what a lot of people don't understand is that blacks suppress a lot of this. They suppress a lot of it. They deal with a lot of it, right? And oftentimes they deal with it through spirituality, because we are a very spiritual-led people, right? However, when it gets to the point, that breaking point, that's why oftentimes people cannot understand, well, why are they burning up their own community? Or why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Because what you are seeing is pent-up anger that has manifested itself for decades.
That's not Target that's burning. That's a bunch of other things.
Oh, yeah. So it's symbolic of a lot of stuff that's been buried, but this incident excavated it. Now it's at the surface, boiling over, right? And so that's what you see manifesting itself, and you really have to, like I say, try to get to understand the essence of black folk, right? The soul of black folk, if you really want to understand, why things happen the way they do, right? When you see these types of occurrences happening in the community, but we can go on and on about that, but it's much deeper.
It's really important, and
it's much deeper.
I'm going to take a break from the conversation briefly, and then I want to come back to that and start talking a little bit about the background and the history and the context and why some of that's in play. But I want to take a moment, if you have tuned in the last little bit here. This is Conversations in Color. My name is Ed Hudgens. I'm your host, and I want to reintroduce our great panelists here. We've got Dr. Rod Jones, who is our resident panelist here today, and from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. We've got Thurgood Dennis, who recent graduate from University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, star athlete, philosopher at large. We got Willie McCaleb, who works with special education over at North Star Middle School, runs the SHAG Academy, athletic training, mentorship type stuff. And I'm so glad that you guys are here. I'm serious. We could probably keep this conversation going all night long, because I'm learning a ton, and I'm being emotionally affected by it too. So I sure hope that those of you who are listening in,
it's therapeutic.
It is. Yes, absolutely. And I'm hoping that we can kind of figure out ways to continue that therapy going forward. So. We want to take a moment, though. We talked earlier at the beginning of the show how you, as the community listening and watching this, can contribute to the conversation. Adam is watching our chat. Adam, do we have any questions or comments?
Yeah, we do. Before I get to that real quick, just a reminder on how you can get engaged in the chat today. So if you are joining us on the Paragon live stream, you can drop your questions right in the chat on there. If you're listening to us on Converge Radio 99.9 FM, you can call 715-600-0267. Again, that's 715-600-0267. Our first question comes from Jessica, and she's wondering about interactions with police officers, and specifically, could you speak to if it makes a difference if it's a white police officer versus a black police officer, a female police officer versus a male police officer? Do skin color and or gender make a difference in those interactions, or is it just the cherries and berries, the red and blue lights that you see, and it's just that initial reaction?
Thurgood, you want to kick it off?
I think for me, and I've had interactions with not all of the members of the police that you mentioned, it's more the job itself, the cherries and berries. And when I think it's important to say that when I say defund the police, or if there's a rap song that says a different thing, the police, I'm not talking about specifically John Smith, the officer. I'm talking about just the sort of the role, the community role, the cultural spot of police. And so for me, it's almost like if they're doing their job properly, then you shouldn't really notice a difference between those. I have had an interaction where I was pulled over on my moped by a female cop, and I was so scared because this was around the time of, I to be honest, don't remember the name, but it was another like reflective period of someone who had been shot nationwide, and I think it was something in Baltimore. I don't remember exactly why those riots started. I feel like it was around that time. And my moped was unregistered, and I knew it. And I was explaining to her, I knew my moped was unregistered, that I was going to get it fixed. I was like shaking, and she put her arm around me. And that's the first time that any cop has ever done that. And it was a lady, and she was like, I understand why you're scared, but let's just turn the moped off, get up. You're not going to get any ticket today. I'm just going to give you a warning. And I'll give you a note that if you get pulled over on your way between here and where you're going to get registered, that you've already been pulled over and not to do anything more. But she could see me getting a little... just emotional, and I was nervous. So I think that's my only, different than white male cop interaction. But it certainly made me feel welcome. She was a member of the Eau Claire Police Department. I still don't know her name, but she handled that well for me, from my perspective.
Wow. Shout out to her for that.
Yeah, for sure. What about Rod, Willie?
I would say, I'm going to get the same feeling regardless when I see those lights, no matter who's behind the wheel. But I do think there's a different feeling when it's a male, female, white, black, whatever. I think, and Rod, you may attest to this too, is I think the white male cop would be something I would be more alarmed to. So when they do get out, that I think I would hit another sense of urgency or worry. And just because of what I've seen over the course of, like, since I was a little kid, you know, just growing up and understanding, like, your history a little bit, you know what I mean? And just, you know, being with your parents and understanding where they went through and where they come from, right? Yeah. And what you normally see was the white male hurting the black male. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's why, like, when I see a white male cop, I'm not saying they all, I'm just saying that's a common factor that's going to, like, set off right now, you know, a sense of worry.
It's that immediate connection in your mind.
Absolutely, and that goes back to that load, you know what I mean? You gotta, that's my experiences and things that I've seen and understood and seen how we was being treated and how we, like, I go back to, like, my mom saying you got the strikes against you. It's the same concept, right? So when I see a white male officer, like, that's what I'm going to be alarmed to. Sure. Before I see, like, if it's a white female officer, I might, you know what I mean, I might be a little bit more cooler than I would be for a white male. You know what I mean? So
no, I hear you.
Yeah, I'll be brave. You know, I think it's important for us to remember the historicism, right, of these interactions, black, white, you know, gender-based, whatever they may be. I think also, too, that oftentimes these situations are just that. They're situational, right? And so from experiences that I've had, right, the level of questioning that has been levied against me from white men who stopped me is much more aggressive in orientation, right? Than, you know, black men who stopped me. The comfort level, like I say, just kind of going back to that instinct, right? And these narratives that you've been taught, right? And these narratives that you've seen play themselves out through media, you know, time after time. Those things are loaded into your mind, you know, and so when you encounter those situations, they all come to fruition.
At that point.
At that point in time, right? They all become that spectacle, right, through which you see the world at that moment, at that particular point in time. So these are real palpable things, right, that we deal with. They're not make-believe. And it's hard for you to conceptualize what we're saying unless you can, in a bona fide sense, wear my shoes.
Right.
Right? For example, I don't know what it's like to be a white woman or a white male, so to speak, so I can't speak to that, right?
It's pretty easy and good to be a white man.
Right. Well, you know, so I think, you know, oftentimes when you hear, right, these narratives shared by black men, they're kind of treated dismissively to a large degree, right? Almost as if they're make-believe, you know? But I think people need to genuinely listen to conversations like this, because I think he goes back to this idea of care. And when you care about people, right, you react to them in a completely different way.
Yes. Relationship changes everything, right? Absolutely. When you're eye to eye with somebody, sitting at the table with them, it's just different.
Yeah.
You know, I remember the first time I met Willie, actually. It wasn't watching you play football.
No.
It was we were both speaking at a rally about the cages, the kids in cages down on the border. And that's how that was my context for knowing Willie in the first place. Was this is a guy who's standing up for kids? You know, from the beginning. But it was that eye-to-eye contact and the conversation, and we made that connection. Had I never, or you never made that connection with me, and I never made that connection with you, I wouldn't know. I might know Willie's a football player.
Yeah, I was going to say, it humanizes you in a different way, right?
Yep.
It really does, if you take the time to care about something someone else cares about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. You gotta have an open mind and a clear heart. A clear mind, open heart, you know?
Empathy is a powerful thing.
Yep.
I mean,
that's a good question, though.
That is. Appreciate that, Jessica.
I know we've got some more questions, Adam. We may have to table part of our discussion and pick it up on another session. What do you have for us, Adam?
Yeah, definitely. I've got a question here from Angela. For our listeners, too, a really great book on black masculinity is What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker by Damon Young, and he really explores some of the topics around why there might be some mental health issues in the black community and why people are unwilling to talk emotionally. And this next question kind of comes from an emotional place. So just to preface that, Angela asks, as a white woman married to a black man and a mother to a biracial child, the question I find myself asking is, how can I love them well? Particularly in this context of hatred and racism in our country, what can those of us who love you do to love you well?
It's a powerful question.
That is.
That's a powerful question. I think it starts with affirmation and acknowledgement, right? That black men may endure a certain pain, a certain agony, a certain sense of oppression that no one else in this world, of any other race or creed, may understand, right? It's just that deep. It's just that intractable. And I think, you know, if you can try to at least, you know, place yourself in a position to where that understanding that black men are an enigma. They are an enigma, right? They're going to make mistakes. They're going to respond in ways and behave in ways, right, that may seem crazy or antithetical to what the world or society may suggest that how they function, right? There are reasons behind that, right? And black men oftentimes engage in this masking project. You know, masking. We mask, we hide a lot of things, right? And I don't know if it's bravado or machismo or whatever it may be, but we understand that we have to be, I guess, tough, if you will, right? We have to be tough. You know, and a lot of times we don't have the luxury of being soft. Yeah. We just don't. And so a lot of times, you know, the ones that we love most dearly are the ones that probably suffer the most as a result of that. And so I would say to Angela that you have to understand that, you know, we love hard. Black men love hard. We love hard. We love you, but you have to understand that there's a lot of nooks and crannies about us that you'll probably never come to understand, right? So acceptance, you know, and just being there, just standing tall and just persevering and knowing that we have a lot on our minds, right? We're constantly trying to work through. But if you can be our pillar, our source of strength, right, we'll never abandon you. We'll love you to the end. And we'll go down with you. Ride or die, fool. Ride or die.
Ride or die.
So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
To answer that question.
Yeah, I would agree too. I mean, that's the key. You know, you want to make sure that, you know, that brother, that man understands and knows that you're gonna be there. You know what I mean? You know, for better or for worse, because it's gonna be a lot of things that we deal with that's gonna be some rough times, and you got to be able to absorb that and not take it too personal as well. Like, it's a lot of things that we fighting, that we're trying to get rid of, that, you know, may seem like it's directed towards you, but it's really not. You know, that pain is coming from someone else, or we dealing with that, you know, in a different manner. But, you know, us as black men, we are taught to be prideful, not to show no emotion, you know. Like, my pops, you know, I tell my pops I love him and all that, but, like, my pops, I never really see my pops and my mom kiss and all. He's not gonna show no emotion. So, like, we was taught to be prideful man, like, and like you was talking about putting that mask on, like, that's hard to take off. You know, that mask is hard to take off because we are so prideful. We don't want nobody to see us, you know, crying, or want nobody to see our pain or nothing like that, because we taught that we got to be strong enough to endure that and hold the family together. So I know she had mentioned like that the mental health piece, as well, and I think that has a lot to do with it because if you got so much pride, you're not going to express no emotions to get that stuff out of you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you have to get it out, but we taught to be prideful, you know? So that's a huge piece going to the mental health part of it because you're not giving your mental no type of relief because you're just building it up and just letting it keep going. So but yeah, my advice to Angela is continue being a pillar, and like Ross said, just acknowledge and understand the life of a black man. You might not understand it to totality, but you got to be that. You got to have an open mind about it. Understand what's gonna come, you know, and be ready to take that on and move forward. It's not gonna be easy,
man. So. I'm going to just go ahead and interject here. One of the things that I think about the most, and I mentioned this a little earlier, when it comes to these issues, is creating the space. So, you know, you guys both talked about the mask and the toughness and like you're not supposed to show emotion and that kind of thing. I think we can probably agree, maybe this is a bad assumption, but we can probably agree that that's not the healthiest way to do life.
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely.
So like, you guys have already spoken to the root of that lack of space to be able to heal, to feel through trauma and stuff. What can we do? Like, and I say we because as a brother and as somebody who wants to walk through this with you, like, what can I do? What can you do? What can we do together to try to help create that kind of space?
Sure. Go ahead.
I think I would combine this with the answer I was going to say to Jessica, which is that when you try to reduce a human being, the least level I can reduce it to is a body, a mind, and a spirit. And that's I can't get it smaller than that because those all matter to what actions come out and what thoughts are allowed to come in, what masks can even be put on, what can be taken off. And so because of that, I sort of have a precursor to love for everyone in this room in that I'm sort of aware of that. And I know I don't know everyone that well, but I am aware that there's, 8 universes in here, 8 different ways of perceiving reality. And I guess the answer for me, that would be to love me well, would be to love me completely and allow for space for my spirit to work. And it's going to be weird when you're working with all of yourself like that. It is not just sort of a walk in the park. You're realizing things and you're noticing things. You're changing on the fly. One day might change your entire worldview. And come with us on that. Come to our universe and we'll come see your universe. And there's like a group trip made by that, a group minefield sort of set up by that. And once you're a part of that, it's really hard to go back to racism because it's such a curiosity-bringing thing. You're like, wait, so you think of the world like that? And then you start to process really fast, and I think it's really fun making new friends in that way, and that's sort of a way to spread love as the simplest way I can put it.
Man, that's awesome. I can tell you've been spending some time thinking about philosophy.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary.
That's a good response, Thurgood. I would say in response to your question, Ed, really it begins with something that's, I would suggest, is rudimentary, but it's not. And I would suggest that, if we can just learn to start with this ethic of care. You've heard me say that repeatedly tonight.
Yeah.
Right? This ethic of care. This ethic of care that is grounded in this notion, this idea that moral action, right, is based upon our relationship with others, right? That is also encapsulated within this sense of benevolence, right, and love that we have towards one another, right, which then becomes a virtue. And I think oftentimes, we just don't take the time to actually stop and care, right? To have a sense of benevolence, right? For one another as human beings. Mm-hmm. We're too busy dehumanizing one another to care. And there are so many ways that we do this, right? And I would argue that it's becoming increasingly worse, right? Because there's so many social media platforms where you can deconstruct anything and everything, right? The person on the other side of that computer screen or iPhone or iPad, whatever it may be, they're no longer human.
Right. And there's no accountability.
Right? And so this sense of care, I would argue, is becoming less and less and less the larger the digital divide becomes. Right? And so it is an interesting thing, right? Because before, you know, the advent of all this technology, you really had to interact with each other.
Person to person.
Yeah, you had to pick up that old school phone and talk to somebody on the other end or whatever. Now you can just text. You know, they're digitized. You know? And so I would say that that's how we start. And if we can get back to this notion of caring for each other, right, that's the first step.
Yeah.
Right? But that requires this moral obligation to interact with each other as human beings.
So, being a strategist is part of the way I'm built. It's part of my wiring. So how? How do we do this? And I'm throw this out to everybody. Like, how do we? Well, first of all, the idea of convincing people to care is that feels hopeless in some ways. But like, even for within the black male community specifically, what can be done? Because I have a feeling that the emotional wellness that, you know, we're talking about, that we want to see, probably is going to have to start internally amongst the black male community.
I mean, I think the way to start with that is what we're doing tonight. You're having these conversations, all right, and with people that may not even look like you, right? And when you have these conversations and you forced to interact and talk with people, that changes the narrative that's been used for over centuries. You know what I mean? Because now you're getting to know me for who I am as a person, not knowing me for what I look like. You know what I mean? And I think one of the biggest things in our community is that we as black men need to learn who we are. So we need to have conversations and understanding about who we are as people. You know what I mean? And I feel like once we able to do that, then you can, you know, maybe make some change, because once we was forced to not communicate and talk to people, have face-to-face conversations, everything started to deviate, you know, things started to change, right? And when you get to know somebody coming face-to-face like I did, me knowing that you was white, that didn't affect me at all, you know what I'm saying? And same thing that you see as me, but think about how many people out there that's not educated to come into a conversation like that. So sure. I think where you started at is continue building blocks and getting more people involved in having these types of conversations, because, you know, in the media, not everybody follows everybody, right?
Sure.
So if you get some type of cultural push where you having people have real life conversations about things that matter, I think you can kind of change it, and maybe you can get some people to follow.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would also add to that is that I think that black men have become so successful at this masking project. Yeah. I'm going back to that.
No, it's legit.
And so I say that because we as black men need to learn how to allow ourselves to become more vulnerable. Yeah.
Right.
More vulnerable. I mean, just us sitting here tonight, right, suggests that we're allowing ourselves, right, to be vulnerable, to speak a certain truth, right, that otherwise we may not necessarily feel comfortable doing, right? We don't know how many listeners you guys have tuning into this show, but we're here, right? We're manifesting a truth, right? We're opening up ourselves to critique, to a different type of narrative, right? Making ourselves vulnerable, right? And I think when other black men see other black men doing that, it becomes more acceptable, right? And I think it makes our truth, our reality, more real,
And easier to tell.
Right, absolutely. So I think it starts with a place of vulnerability, right? Because we have to be willing to take that risk with people like Ed, right? Or people like, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Adam,
right? You know, people who may not necessarily be in our immediate circles, right? That we've learned through growing up, you know, not to trust so much or to have very, you know, limited trust with, right? Until we're allowed to bring down our barriers. And so I think that, you know, once we get to that place as black men to where we allow ourselves to become more vulnerable, and other black men begin to see that, and it becomes a more normative practice, you know, maybe we'll see some changes. Significant changes.
I think it helps people have courage.
Yeah.
You know, I know that just from my own personal experience and going through some emotional healing personally, which I'm going to talk a little bit about when we're closing the show. But there was something powerful about sitting with a group of men.
Yeah.
They were all white. I mean, I'm just honest. You know, they were all white, but we sat together and we were sharing like the deep dark stuff, and to hear other people sharing stuff, and then you might share something that doesn't on the surface sound nearly as egregious as what somebody else is sharing, but everybody in the room validates what you're talking about.
Sure.
You know, that's a powerful dynamic.
It is.
It's empowering.
I mean, just listen to these brothers here. You know, you know, when I'm saying things, they're like, "Yeah, Doc, we get you." You know, I'm looking at Thurgood, I'm looking at Willie, and I'm nodding my head. Yeah. So that affirmation, right? You know, and it's this connectedness, right? So if I were to see you again, Thurgood, I mean, I'm connected to you now.
Yeah.
Right? Willie, I'm connected to you now.
It's over now.
Right? And so immediately, I'm going to have a different level of conversation with you guys, right? Because that wall has already been eradicated.
Yeah. No longer a simple stranger. It's like
absolutely.
now you're complex.
Well, and also, it's not like y'all been sitting around the bar drinking a beer and talking about sports.
Absolutely, man. Because it becomes, it becomes more real, right? And so we're here talking about an issue that we deeply care about.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Which makes us connected on a deeper human level. You know? Yeah. And those are the places where we need to go.
Yeah.
I think, too, there's an element, especially since we brought social media into the mix, of a lot of white people invalidating these vulnerable moments that especially black men have on social media. They write them off as anecdotal, or they ask for more examples, or they say that, well, that didn't happen because you're black, that happened because blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely.
And that's not okay. We're asking people to be open and honest about their experiences, and yet we invalidate them every single day.
Yeah.
And so as allies and as white people that are listening and trying to learn and trying to do better, we need to do a better job of doing just that and just listening and accepting that these are truths and that they are not things they're not made up stories, and they're not conspiracies, and they're not just ridiculous anecdotal stories.
Yeah.
They're vulnerable moments that people are sharing and realities that are lived every single day.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, people like you and me, when we see that junk happening, we got to just jump in and say, back the hell up. This is not okay. Because, I mean, seriously.
No.
It's something I think about. So, you know, you've got the recent reminders, I'm going to say, of trauma in the video of George Floyd being murdered by the police, in the video of Jacob Blake being shot in the back 7 times by the police. But to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, those are just triggers. Like when you see those things, yeah, and I'm not minimizing the loss that those people have experienced. I'm saying for you as black men, I'm guessing that that's just a trigger for everything you've ever known about American history and everything you've known growing up in America, right? So like one of the things I think about is one of the stereotypes you'll hear from white folks, and I grew up in a family where I'm not talking necessarily about my immediate family, just the people around me said a lot of dumb things and racist things, overtly racist things, and sometimes implicitly racist things, which is, in some is really more insidious. And one of the stereotypes about black men is they don't stay with their families, right? No. Like that whole thing where they abandon their families. And so here's the thing: is if there's even truth to that, think about the fact that when Africans were brought over as hostages and became slaves, their marriages didn't mean anything to the white owners. The institution of marriage was destroyed for the African population that were brought here by the American owners, by the American slavery system. And so when you talk about that institution, which is holy and is important and is that's like integral to cultural systems.
Sure.
When that basic building block of a culture is nullified, what does that do to the psyche? What does that do then to the perspectives of loyalty to a spouse and the perspectives of, when people are invalidating and telling you it doesn't matter? Like, these are the things I think about as somebody who is moderately aware of history.
Right.
And
that's the thing. That's hard. See, getting to the historics of these issues is hard work. And people don't want to do that.
Right.
Right? They want the superficial. Right?
Like the hashtag.
Right. They
That's
want
right.
the hashtag. They want the superficial. They want the expedient, right? But they never really want to talk about the deep structural issues, right, that have historically borne themselves out.
Right.
Right? There is a direct, infallible correlation, causation, tangible relation, right, to many of these issues that the black community face in this country. But no one wants to take the time to actually hear those things, right? Because I would argue, in many respects, it's just abjectly painful for many people.
Yes.
I mean, whether you're white, black, red, yellow, whatever color you are. I mean, to hear the heinousness, the subjugation, the dehumanization of a people, right? That's painful stuff, man. In fact, when I was in my early 20s, I was telling my wife I used to do a lot of readings on black history, and I had to step away from it because it was just too painful, the stuff I was learning, right? like Thurgood mentioned, right? So you got your education, then you start reading books, and then you really start learning.
It changes a little bit.
Right? And so that's what I was doing, and it was just too painful, and I pushed away from it because, man, I mean, it's some hard stuff. And so, you're right, Ed. I mean, there's a lot of, structural things that are just there that people just don't want to take the time to come to understand. And as Adam mentioned, just completely debunk and nullify and write off as anecdotal because it's easily dismissed, right? It becomes fake news.
Well, I think of... Well, and some of these things are things, Salika has become my sister, and I'm learning every day from her, right?
Right.
And she's a history professor, and I love history, so I'm learning all this stuff from her. And in the last few months, I'm really starting to see more clearly some things that I hadn't seen before, even though I've cared about stuff.
Yeah.
I'm seeing there's you've got slavery is done away with, but most of the abolitionists were actually still racist. And so that kind of implicit bias that was there for them, that has played a very definite role in how things have developed historically. And then you've got Jim Crow, the Black Codes, mass incarceration, and all these things that that especially black men, I'm going to say, have had to be concerned about forever. And it's just this lineage of abuse and oppression that continues, And as a white male, I can't relate to the cognitive load that creates for you guys.
It just gets reconfigured, right? It gets reconfigured. It's called something different, right? But it's all the same thing. And they've become quite expert at doing this, right?
Yep.
And vilifying, black men in the process as if, was somehow just malfeasant, right?
Yep.
But these things are structured, right? They're designed. They just don't come out of nowhere.
Right.
Right? These things are carefully crafted.
Right.
And they're it's just interesting. And, I appreciate you, bringing me on to have this conversation. But these are the things I think as black men that we need to come to understand and have serious, candid discussions about. to make ourselves more vulnerable, right, to other black men, so that we can carry this charge forward, right, and get at the essence of our well-being, right, which is what this conversation is about.
Yep. And we're just getting this conversation started.
Yeah.
There's so much more to talk about. We had a couple of topics we had planned on talking about tonight we didn't even get close to. So, which is great. This is really...
Part 2, 3, 4.
Yes. So, Adam, I understand we have another community question.
Yeah, a good segue into our action items for the night. Samantha asked, what are your thoughts on being an ally? She's a young white female and is looking for ways to best support her black, indigenous, and friends of color. How can she best use her privilege to work towards equality? In history, she understands that whites have worked with protesters in the freedom rides, as well as creating a sense of normalcy by being present in restaurants during sit-ins. What are your thoughts on how to participate in the modern times?
I mean, I would just continue. It sounds like you're already on the right track. Just continue advocating, and standing up for what you believe in, because as allies, right, I feel like you're definitely gonna get judged, right? So you gotta be ready for the ones that look like you, that disagree with you. You gotta be ready for that battle and understand, like, you can't fold under that. I think, like we talked about earlier, I think as long as you understand and acknowledge and accept the truth for what the truth is and not what you were taught back in grade school, the history, that false history, but I think that's the key, is you just continue pushing for what's right, keep standing up, you know what I mean? Because the way she, articulated the question seemed like she already is on that right path and on that right track. Yeah. So I would say continue going, and continue standing up and pushing for what you believe in, and don't let nobody stir you any way different.
I'd like to piggyback on that as a white dude. For those of us who might face some kind of, and I'm talking about white folks, any of us who might face some kind of flack or whatever for standing up for what's right in this circumstance, in this context, we need to always recognize that's a very small burden to bear compared to what our brothers and sisters have gone through. And so, I've faced some of it, and I'm sure there are people say all kinds of things behind my back, and it doesn't matter to me. But that little bit of flack that you'll get doesn't really mean anything, in the grand scope of things. So, let's talk about action steps. Let's talk, so I'm going to lean on you guys a little bit here because y'all know the dynamics better than I do. But one thing I would suggest is how do we figure out, Willie and I talked about this a while back, and I think it's showing itself to be even more relevant during this conversation. How do we create space for black men to come together and feel safe to where they can start talking about real stuff together? Like this is great. Mm-hmm. And and hopefully we can find black male friends who we can get them to engage with this video afterwards. But what can we do to make it something that can be ongoing, something that can be a resource going forward?
I'd look at it from the perspective of an athlete. When you're on a team, all that stuff kind of goes away. And for me, my teams were my punching bag to let all this out. I had no mask. When you're in the flow state, if the ball bounces right, you go right. There's no thinking. There's like no Thurgood present. It's just like the action and reaction. And my teammates would see that, and they were we all were kind of coached and taught that the body can follow the mind. And so if we're going to do an action plan, I think there has to be some mind changing. There has to be some being teammates, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a little weird when you don't actually have a sport, when you're just people, but you can think of yourself as a teammate. Like, if I need to send someone in motion or something, and they need to, like, pitch the ball to me or something like that, just be there for that person as what they really need. Like, get to know specifically them. I know there are a bunch of other actions that are kind of general. Like you said, she was on the right page just asking that question. Yeah. And just kind of getting there. But if you can get to that very specific level where you're like, someone could cry in front of you, someone could tell you any like deep dark thing, and then I think we mentioned it before that you can no longer look at that person like a stranger. They're like your teammate in a sense.
Right.
Like you're definitely gonna go up to bat for them.
Yep.
And the more of that can happen, and that's such a non-specific action plan, because that could be where you work, that could be cleaning up, that could be in any sort of families or living situations or houses or any job. That could come in so many different forms, and does. And you got to just sort of be aware of when the chance to be a teammate comes up. And it's going to be kind of tough, but like, I'll block for you, you'll block for me, we'll get it figured out.
So be a good teammate. Know what the teammate needs. All right.
It's a good. I mean, it's good, Ed. I mean, in terms of action steps, I would suggest that, you know, we as black men need to coexist within this world with perhaps a greater degree of urgency and intentionality in our relationships with each other.
Yeah.
I think, you know, a lot of times, you know, we're kind of in our own spaces, right? And we're trying to navigate this world. We have so much that we're dealing with cognitively, right? We don't take the time to care for ourselves and to care for our brothers.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're so busy trying to navigate this world, right? With all the pressures that are exerted upon us. So I think, you know, we need to really start by trying to become much more purposeful and intentional, right? And the alliances that we build with each other.
Yeah.
Right? And it's interesting because a lot of times, you know, I found myself, I've tried to reach out to other black men and, you know, but perhaps I didn't try hard enough, right? Or I wasn't as intentional, right, about what I was trying to do. And so I think that we have to do that a lot more. And I think once we do that, we have to agree that, you know, we have to make ourselves, as I talked about earlier, you know, more vulnerable, right? But a lot of that comes in time, right?
Right.
With experience with each other and just, you know, and we're always pressed for time. And so it's a process. And I think once we understand that it is a process, right, you know, and we are of kindred spirit, right, we're trying to achieve the same goal here, I think it makes it easier for us to kind of make that a much more exponential process, right? Because we've done that as a small group or whatever it may be, right? With this singular purpose, right? And then we expand. And I think, you know, just to kind of think about what Dennis is doing with POC, right? That's going to expand.
Yeah.
That's going to expand. So you can look at models like POP, I'm sorry, Power of Perception, right? And what he's doing with kids, right? Black men can do that with each other. They can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Be a group.
So I hate this because there's 2.5 minutes left. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface on some things. I will say, if the three of you, if we want to keep in contact after this, and if there's a way I can help facilitate anything that can facilitate that space, I want to. I just know how it's impacted me to have that kind of space and to think through those things. I have testimony, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you guys for being here, and then I'm going to...
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good talk.
Sure.
So just in closing here, I just was talking about my own journey in emotional healing. And when I was 8 to 10 years old, I don't remember the exact dates, I experienced some pretty mild cases of sexual abuse. And I'm not minimizing it. It just, you know, they're not the egregious stories you might hear from other people, but still, they impacted me really deeply. And the trauma from those experiences, the impact of those experiences led me into years and years and years of addiction and depression and being self-absorbed. Just a whole lot of impacts. A lot of weight gain, still working that part of things off. But this very mild sexual abuse I experienced had this kind of impact on me for 20 plus years. That's my story as just this white dude who experienced this stuff as a kid. When I think of the kind of trauma that my black brothers and sisters have experienced, and tonight in this context I'll speak specifically of my black brothers, what I experienced is pretty small in a lot of ways. And especially when you take into consideration the historical context. When you think about the fact that Africans were torn away from their home and their home cultures and put on these disgusting ships and held as hostages, and then became slaves, became like cattle, if you will, for white Americans. Marriage didn't mean anything. Their culture didn't mean anything anymore. And just subjugation, dehumanization all over the place. And you think about how that then continued on past emancipation into Jim Crow and the black codes and mass incarceration. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we had postcards here in America that showed people being lynched. And that was something that you would send as a greeting to somebody else. And so when we think about the current events that are going on, and we think about the things we've seen on video with George Floyd and Jacob Blake and so many other instances, we have to remember these are things that are happening in the context of this broader story, this broader narrative that's happening, that are all about trauma, constant trauma that creates a cognitive load that nobody should have to bear. We need to be able to connect the dots between the experiences like I've had that impacted me deeply. And I have to start thinking about how this incredible trauma that my brothers have experienced, how it has impacted them, and how it impacts how they think, and how it impacts how they see blue and red lights in their rearview mirror. Well, thank you so much for joining Conversations in Color. Thanks to Pablo, Uniting Bridges, Converge Radio. Thanks again to these incredible panelists. Appreciate the courage to come in here and talk about this stuff. Really excited about next week as well. We're going to talk about politics and race, and we've got Representative Jody Emerson and Representative Jesse James joining us next week. Should be a great conversation. Thanks again for joining us. Hope we'll see you again next week.
Awesome.